And on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, Steinberg released Cubase 11. And we're going to take a look at it today. Hey everyone, we're back and a new version of Cubase is here, Cubase 11. But before we begin, I don't usually like to talk about current events, but this past weekend, someone who I've probably watched on TV more than anyone in my lifetime, Alex Trebek, passed away. He was by all accounts a good man, and my condolences go out to his family. But what inspired me was Alex, despite having grade 4 terminal pancreatic cancer and being 80 years old, he kept going to work and filming new episodes of Jeopardy every single day in his final weeks. And I'm sure that Alex can teach people a lot of lessons, but the lesson that I'm going to take from his life is do what you love. And that's enough of my soapboxing. Let's get into the review. We're here in Cubase, and I think this may be a somewhat controversial update because there's no big ticket new item, new instrument. And I think people will bristle at that, but I personally like it a lot because a lot of the improvements are quality of life improvements. Things that you use all the time have been streamlined or features have been added to them that will make a difference to your workflow. And no better example of that is some of the changes they've made to the key editor. This key editor here, I'll open up this retro log, and I just have these three notes. And one thing that they've done, I'll go from the second coolest to the third coolest to the first coolest changes that they've made here in the key editor. One thing they've done is for the pitch bend functionality, typically, your lane will be velocity, but you can come here and switch it to pitch bend. They've allowed automating pitch bend curves just like you do for volume and stuff in the project window. And if we go to settings here, we can choose how many steps or semitones we want to automate. I'll just keep it at 4 because I think my biggest bend is 3. And I could take this first note here and we can draw in some lines. And see, we can automate the curves, put bends so that we can make our pitch bends perfect. And that was a feature that didn't exist before, but it exists now. And we'll do that again for this track as well. So you can have these perfect bends and you get a... And so that's something that didn't exist before that's kind of cool that you can automate the pitch bends. Of course, you could always do it with your pitch bend wheel, but it's a slightly more functionality. So another new feature in the key editor is the scale assistant here. So if I turn on my step editor up on my information bar and I play in a quick C major, we can actually snap it to different scales. So we can choose a minor and quantize the pitches. And as you can see, quantizing, sometimes it doubles up notes. So I'll take off my step editor, and you have to sort of come in and finagle a few notes here and there. But then you have C minor instead of C major. And if you click Show Scale Note Guides, it'll actually make all the white notes. You can see they don't correspond with the white notes don't correspond with the white keys. The white notes will be the notes that are correct within the scale. And it'll show you scale suggestions. So if you choose F harmonic minor, you quantize pitches, or C sharp melodic minor, quantize pitches. And it'll play. And you can see there's a lot of scales to choose from. Raga Todi, let's try that. And then we'll quantize these pitches. But having a scale, and you can actually snap live input, so if you play anything wrong, you know, I want a D sharp, let's say Phrygian. Well, I don't really know the D sharp Phrygian mode by heart, but if I snap live input, it'll transpose wrong notes I played to the nearest right note within that scale. So that's kind of cool, the scale assistant. It's you can use it to sort of make sure you don't play any off notes in a specific mode or scale that you're going for, or you can use it to teach yourself, you know, all the modes and the alternative scales, you know, Lydic, diminished, Balinese, Hungarian, Oriental, Chinese, Hungarian too. It's kind of cool to have this feature in there, and you can quantize pitches to your selected scale in your selected key. And so that's a cool new feature. The final new feature in the key editor is you can have global tracks. So if you have marker tracks, tempo tracks, signature tracks, you can actually view them from the key editor window. So if I add a marker track, I'll call it marker, and I put in some markers, I come back to my key editor. If I go to this global tracks and show the marker, all of my markers are in there from the marker track. So that's kind of cool, especially for tempo changes if you're scoring or something like that. Pretty neat. The next thing I'd like to show you guys is there's a new side chaining functionality. In one of the new plugins, which is Frequency, you may remember Frequency, it's an old plugin, but this is actually Frequency 2. You can see it down there in the lower left hand. So there's 4 new plugins. There's Imager, Frequency Squasher, and Supervision. I won't throw on Imager yet because it causes real-time latency, but Frequency 2, this is a real game changer. I use Frequency probably more than any other plugin because it's Cubase's best built-in plugin for equalization. Well, they've added 2 killer features. We can play this track here. And you can actually have dynamic EQ on each band now. So we'll activate it, and we'll have it. So dynamic EQ functions, we'll just solo this real quick. Sort of like a compressor and EQ together. You can see now if I take this off, put it back on, so I love dynamic EQ. I've been using third-party dynamic EQs, but now that it's baked in to Frequency, I think I'll be using Frequency even more than I was before, which was basically on every track. Another thing they've added to Frequency 2 is linear phase processing on every single band, which makes Frequency an ideal go-to equalizer for the mastering stage of things. So Frequency 2 is a big quality of life, you know. It's very similar to the old Frequency, but eminently usable. I know last year they released Pad Shop 2, and I was like, man, this is awesome, all this new technology. I used it on 1 or 2 tracks all year long. I'm going to be using this constantly and using the dynamic EQ effect that's included in it now, as well as using the linear phase processing on things like mastering or bus processing. The next new plugin is called Squasher, and Squasher is kind of a multi-band up and down compressor. I think it's designed for things like EDM, but you could use it for just about anything. And it'll work great. And these 2 new plugins, they also have a new feature, which I think they're going to eventually integrate into all the Cubase plugins. It's multiple sidechain input chains. So you've always been able to add multiple sources, but you can actually have feeding from different tracks. So if you have a huge template, you can use a sidechain input from several different chains. And I think that's pretty cool, if you ask me. And the final new plugin is called Imager. It causes latency in real-time processing, so my voice may not match what I'm saying, but let's throw it in there. It's a spatial panner. A multi-band panner. So it functions as a visualization tool and as a panning tool. So that's kind of cool too. And then supervision is also a new one. It's just a visualization tool. But you can get loudness, phase, spectral. So more visualization tools to help you see what's going on with your music if you're not all that into using your ears. There are some new sample sets included. I think there's 4 of them. Dance Floor Tech House. That's what it sounds like. Hard Knocks, which is like a hip hop. Sample pack. What else is there? Night Call Synthwave. So synth's pretty popular these days. And finally, there's a Noir. It's a cinematic library with some Bramphs. So I could see, if you're working on cinematic projects, this might be like, buddy, I got bad news. What is it? I have to take a dump. So very useful if you're a sound designer to have this in your bag of tricks available right in the media bay. So those 4 new sample libraries, they're there for you to play around with. And speaking of samples, let's take a synthwave sample. Lovely. We'll drag that into the sampler track. There's a bunch of new stuff in the sample track, including LFOs and distortion. So you can put on tube distortion. So yeah, pretty cool that there's extra features, extra LFOs, so that the sampler track becomes even more usable this year, because you can do more things with it and you don't have to load it up into a separate sampler. So it's become more robust as a sampling machine. And then the final thing I'll touch on just briefly is a new program that gets installed when you install Cubase 10. You have to use it as an ARA addition. So I had it installed and I saw that it installed as a VST3. I was trying to use it as an insert and I couldn't find it. It's called Spectral Layers. Doesn't exist, bummer. I went to my plugins, and if we search for Spectral Layers on the blacklist, we see Spectral Layer 7, not a valid plugin. And there's some stuff that looks really cool, like reverb reduction, noise reduction, de-hummer, de-esser, de-clipper, de-clicker. So Spectral Layers is basically like a Isotope RX. To use Spectral Layers, you actually have to select the sample and then go to Audio and then go to Processes, Extensions, and then click Spectral Layers, and it opens up the Spectral Layers program. And it's a spectral editing program. You can get in and mess with stuff. I don't know how to use it, so I'm not going to pretend like I do. But but there's 3D view. And if you want more finite control than just editing waveforms, you can switch to the spectral layers. That's going to be a big addition. I guess they were pushing this like, oh, wow, it's including spectra layers now. I don't know how to use it, so I can't really show you, but I'll try to learn, and maybe that'll be the topic of a later video, spectral editing from within Cubase. One thing I will say about spectral layers, though, is that when I look at my missing plugins, these modules that show under spectral layers, declipper, declicker, denoise, dehummer, noise reduction, voice denoiser. On the videos, they're on these sections, but they're not included as modules. So that's kind of a bummer. What are you going to do though, right? And one final thing I'll mention is when I installed this version of Cubase for the first time, my preferences and my key commands didn't transfer over, and that's never happened to me before. So just in case that happens to you, I'd like to show you where that is. It's Windows, Users, Your Username, App Data, Roaming, Steinberg. And then what I had to do was take my 2.5. There's some XML files, key commands, and preferences, I believe. User preferences. And I had to copy those over to the Cubase 11 file and replace the default ones that were in there because they didn't copy, and that's never happened to me before. So in case you run into this problem, this is the file path on Windows: users, your username, app data, roaming, Steinberg, and then you transfer your old ones to your new ones if that happens to you. Of course, there are a few other features, easier stem support. They've allowed batch exporting, and I could have demonstrated that for you, but I think I'll save those for later videos. All in all, I think that a lot of the improvements that were made in this particular version are great, and I think they'll be immediately useful because there are a lot of improvements to the core functionality of the program, and that may not be as exciting as getting a new instrument or a new sample library. But I think that this version will improve the quality of life for Cubase users everywhere if you're upgrading from an earlier version. So that is my 2 cents. I hope you all are staying safe and keep on making music. Peace.